She stood alone in divorce court until one question froze the room. Does the respondent have any legal representation present? Judge Walter's voice echoed against the mahogany panels. Adira glanced at the empty chair beside her. Linda Morgan had texted her resignation 20 minutes ago. Across the aisle, Ryan Mitchell smirked, adjusting his bespoke cuffs while his powerhouse attorney, Douglas, organized a mountain of fabricated evidence. "I am representing myself, Your Honor," Adira said, her voice trembling. Douglas chuckled. A tragic waste of the court's time. Then, Adira looked dead at Ryan. "Are we discussing time, or the offshore accounts in Geneva?" Judge Walter, a man whose 30 years on the bench had etched deep, unforgiving canyons into his face, lowered his reading glasses to the bridge of his nose. He did not immediately strike his gavel. He did not reprimand her for speaking out of turn. Instead, his piercing gray eyes shifted from the fragile-looking woman standing alone at the defense table to the immaculate, tailored monolith that was Ryan Mitchell. Ryan's smirk, a weaponized curve of the lips that Adira had spent 7 years learning to fear, faltered for a fraction of a microsecond. To anyone else, it was invisible. But Adira was an acoustic engineer. She was trained to notice the slightest disruptions in frequency, the tiny anomalies that others ignored. She saw the microscopic tightening of his jaw, the sudden stillness of his impeccably manicured hands. It was the physical manifestation of panic, hastily buried beneath a veneer of arrogant charm. Beside him, Douglas, a shark in a three-piece suit whose billable hours were legendary in the city's elite circles, paused halfway through pulling a document from his leather briefcase. The thick, arrogant chuckle that had just left his throat seemed to hang in the air, suddenly stripped of its power. But it was the empty chair to Adira's left that anchored her reality. Just 30 minutes prior, she had been standing in the cold, marble hallway outside the courtroom, clutching her worn leather satchel, waiting for Linda Morgan. Linda was supposed to be her shield. Linda, with her warm, maternal smile and her promises that the justice system protected the truth. But then, the text had arrived. "Adira, I am so sorry. I cannot represent you today. I am withdrawing as your counsel. Please ask for a continuance. Do not fight them alone. I am so sorry." There had been no explanation, but Adira didn't need one. She knew Ryan. She knew his methods. He didn't just defeat his opponents. He dismantled their infrastructure. He had likely found Linda's vulnerability, a struggling private practice, a husband with mounting medical debts, and applied the precise amount of pressure needed to shatter her resolve. Ryan was a master of structural collapse. He knew exactly which load-bearing pillars to remove to watch a building fall in on itself. Adira took a slow, deep breath, forcing the trembling in her hands to subside. She pressed her fingertips against the cool, polished oak of her table. She felt painfully exposed. Her tailored charcoal suit, bought specifically for this day to make her look formidable, suddenly felt like a cheap costume. She was entirely alone. In the gallery directly behind Ryan sat Bianca. Bianca, with her sleek platinum hair pulled into a severe, elegant chignon, wearing an ice-white designer suit that practically screamed victory. Bianca was not just the woman Ryan had been sleeping with for the last 2 years. She was his newly appointed chief operating officer. She was the woman who had taken Adira's office, Adira's title, and Adira's husband, all without breaking a single perfectly manicured nail. Bianca met Adira's gaze and offered a thin, pitying smile, the kind of smile one reserves for roadkill. "Miss Mitchell," Judge Walter's voice broke the heavy silence, the gravelly baritone echoing through the cavernous space. "This court does not look kindly upon dramatic, unsubstantiated outbursts. You are currently without counsel, a situation that is highly irregular and detrimental to your case. If you are requesting a continuance to secure new representation, I am inclined to grant it, given the sudden nature of your attorney's departure." Adira looked up at the judge. The offer of a continuance was a lifeline. It was a chance to retreat, to regroup, to find another lawyer brave enough or foolish enough to take on Mitchell Industries. But as she looked at Ryan, she saw the triumph settling back into his features. A continuance meant more time for Ryan to hide the assets, more time for Douglas to tie her up in procedural knots, more time for the narrative that she was an unstable, greedy, mentally fragile woman to calcify into legal truth. "No, Your Honor," Adira said. Her voice, which had trembled only moments before, now resonated with a clear, bell-like timbre. "I am not requesting a continuance. I am fully prepared to proceed as my own counsel." Douglas scoffed loudly, dramatically tossing his gold pen onto his notepad. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This is a complex high-net-worth dissolution involving corporate assets, intellectual property, and extensive financial portfolios. The respondent is an engineer, not a litigator. Allowing her to proceed pro se is a guaranteed mistrial waiting to happen. She is emotionally compromised and clearly prone to wild, slanderous accusations. My emotional state is perfectly intact, Mr. Douglas, Adira countered, keeping her eyes locked on the judge. And my accusations are only slanderous if they are false. Judge Walter leaned back in his high leather chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at Adira, truly looked at her. He saw a woman who appeared physically diminished, with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and relentless stress. Yet, there was a rigid, unbreakable tension in her spine. You understand, Miss Mitchell, that if you represent yourself, you will be held to the same legal standards as a practicing attorney? I cannot grant you leniency on procedural matters simply because you lack a law degree. I understand perfectly, Your Honor, Adira replied. Very well, Judge Walter said, picking up his gavel. Let the record show the respondent is proceeding pro se. Mr. Douglas, you may begin your opening statement. And Miss Mitchell, let us keep the focus on the documented assets, not theatrical questions. Of course, Your Honor, Adira murmured, taking her seat. As she sat, she unlatched her leather satchel and pulled out a single, thick manila folder. It was not formatted with legal tabs. It was not bound in premium leather. But as she placed it on the desk, Ryan Mitchell's eyes snapped to it, and for the second time that morning, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. May it please the court, Douglas began, stepping out from behind his imposing mahogany table. He moved with the practiced grace of a predator, buttoning the center button of his suit jacket. We are here today to finalize a tragedy. The dissolution of a marriage is always a sorrowful event, but in this case, it is necessitated by the increasingly erratic, destructive, and ultimately untenable behavior of the respondent, Adira Mitchell. Adira sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly over the manila folder. She had spent weeks bracing herself for this exact moment, knowing that Douglas's strategy would be to assassinate her character before she even had a chance to speak. My client, Ryan Mitchell, is a pillar of the technology and engineering community, Douglas continued, his voice dripping with practiced empathy. He gestured expansively toward Ryan, who was doing an exceptional job of looking suitably solemn and exhausted, playing the part of the long-suffering husband to perfection. He has built Mitchell Industries from a humble startup into a global leader in acoustic technologies. He has provided a life of unimaginable luxury and comfort for his wife. Douglas paused, letting his words steep in the quiet courtroom. He paced slowly toward the center aisle. But wealth and comfort, Your Honor, cannot cure deep-seated psychological instability. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Mitchell has endured a nightmare behind closed doors. He has watched the woman he loved spiral into paranoia. She has made baseless accusations of infidelity, which we will prove were entirely fabricated. She has attempted to interfere with the daily operations of his company. And, most egregiously, she has deluded herself into believing that she is somehow the sole architect of Mitchell Industries' success. Adira felt a hot, familiar spike of fury pierce her chest, but she ruthlessly suppressed it. She could not afford anger. Anger was exactly what they wanted. Anger would prove Douglas's point. Instead, she let her mind drift back, past the sterile walls of the courtroom, to the damp, dimly lit basement of their first rental home. It was there, 7 years ago, that the illusion of Ryan Mitchell began. She remembered the endless nights hunched over oscilloscopes and frequency generators, her fingers stained with graphite as she sketched out the impossible algorithms. She was the one who had conceptualized Project Echo, a revolutionary acoustic dampening metamaterial capable of absorbing 99% of low-frequency sound waves. It was an invention that would change commercial aviation and industrial manufacturing forever. It was her brain, her math, her obsessive dedication. Ryan, at the time, was a charismatic but failing business major with a silver tongue and a trail of bad debts. He couldn't code. He couldn't draft a blueprint, but he knew how to talk. He knew how to sell. You're a genius, Adira, he had whispered to her one night, rubbing her tired shoulders as she stared at a breakthrough simulation on her monitor. But you hate the spotlight. You hate the boardroom. Let me handle the suits. Let me protect you so you can just create. She had loved him. She had trusted him implicitly. When the patent paperwork was filed, she barely glanced at the documents before signing where he pointed. It wasn't until 3 years later, when Mitchell Industries went public and Project Echo was lauded as the invention of the decade, that she realized what he had done. Ryan Mitchell was listed as the sole inventor. Adira's name was completely erased, relegated to a footnote as a consultant. When she confronted him, the mask had slipped for the first time. The charming, supportive husband vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. Who do you think the venture capitalists are going to invest in, Adira? He had sneered in their cavernous, cold penthouse. A beautiful, stuttering nerd who gets panic attacks in crowds, or a visionary CEO. I made this a reality. Your math was nothing without my execution. If you blow this up, we lose everything. Is your ego really worth $1 billion? The gaslighting had been a slow, insidious poison. Over the next 4 years, Ryan systematically isolated her. He replaced their joint bank accounts with allowances. He hired staff who reported directly to him, turning their home into a surveillance state. And when she finally threatened to go to the board with her original notebooks, he brought in Bianca. Bianca wasn't just an affair. She was a psychological weapon. A sharp, brilliant corporate shark brought in to legally lock Adira out of the company she had built. The respondent is demanding half of Mitchell Industries. Douglas's booming voice snapped Adira back to the present. He was practically shouting now, performing for the invisible audience of his own ego. She is demanding 50% of an empire she did not build, patents she did not invent, and revenue she did not generate. We are prepared to offer a generous alimony package, far more than she is legally entitled to provided she signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. But to grant her equity in a company she has actively tried to destroy would be a travesty of justice. Douglas turned sharply on his heel and walked back to his table, buttoning his jacket once more. We ask the court to finalize this divorce based on the generous settlement offer provided, and to dismiss the respondent's delusions of grandeur. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Walter made a few notes on his legal pad before lifting his heavy gaze to Adira. The skepticism in his eyes was palpable. Douglas had painted a masterpiece of misogynistic tropes, the hysterical, greedy wife trying to steal the brilliant husband's hard-earned legacy. Miss Mitchell, Judge Walters said softly, it is your turn. I strongly advise you to focus on the financial realities of this case and avoid the temptation to litigate emotional grievances. You have the floor. Adira stood up. She did not pace. She did not use theatrical hand gestures. She simply stood behind her table, a solitary figure in a storm of their making. She opened the manila folder. Inside were not legal briefs or padded settlement demands. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, printed at a 24-hour internet cafe at 3 o'clock that morning. Thank you, Your Honor, Adira said, her voice eerily calm. Mr. Douglas has spun a compelling narrative. He claims I am seeking half of Mitchell Industries. I would like to correct the record on that matter immediately. Ryan leaned back in his chair, a smug, victorious smile creeping onto his face. He thought she was capitulating. He thought she was breaking under the pressure, just as he had designed. I am not asking for 50% of Mitchell Industries, Adira stated clearly, her eyes locking onto Ryan's. I am asking for 100%. Because, Your Honor, Ryan Mitchell does not own the company. And within the next 20 minutes, I am going to prove that he committed federal wire fraud, perjury, and intellectual property theft to build it. The courtroom erupted. Objection. Douglas roared, surging to his feet so fast his heavy leather chair skidded backward and slammed into the wooden partition. His face, previously a mask of smug superiority, was suddenly flushed with furious scarlet. Objection, Your Honor. This is exactly the kind of slanderous, hysterical outburst I warned the court about. The respondent is attempting to turn a standard dissolution of marriage into a baseless criminal tribunal. Judge Walter slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack cutting through the sudden chaos. Order. Counsel, sit down. Miss Mitchell, I warned you about theatricality. You are walking a razor-thin line regarding contempt of court. You cannot stand in my courtroom and accuse an opposing party of federal crimes without immediate, irrefutable substantiation. I am aware of the rules of evidence, Your Honor, Adira said, remaining perfectly still while the men around her lost their composure. She looked down at the top sheet of paper in her folder. And I do not make accusations I cannot substantiate. In the gallery, Bianca shifted uncomfortably, crossing her legs and leaning forward. Her icy demeanor was cracking. She was staring at the manila folder in Adira's hands as if it were an unexploded bomb. Your Honor, Douglas sputtered, still half standing. She has no evidence. During discovery, her former counsel produced nothing but emotional journal entries and fabricated allegations. She is stalling. I will be the judge of what constitutes evidence in this courtroom, Mr. Douglas. Walter snapped, though his glare remained fixed entirely on Adira. Miss Mitchell, you have precisely 3 minutes to connect your incredibly serious allegations to the division of assets in this divorce. If you fail, I will hold you in contempt, dismiss your claims entirely, and rule in favor of the petitioner's proposed settlement. Proceed. 3 minutes, 180 seconds to dismantle a lie that took 7 years to build. Adira took a breath, letting the chaotic energy of the room wash over her without absorbing it. Your Honor, opposing counsel claims I had no part in the creation of Project Echo, the intellectual property that constitutes 94% of Mitchell Industries' valuation. They claim my husband is the sole inventor. Adira picked up the first piece of paper. I submit to the court Defense Exhibit A. She walked the document over to the bailiff, who handed it up to the judge. She then handed a copy to a stunned Douglas. What you are looking at, Your Honor, is not a patent application, Adira explained, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. It is a server log from the Mitchell Industries internal R&D mainframe, dated exactly 3 days before the patent for Project Echo was officially filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Ryan's face drained of color. The smugness vanished completely, replaced by a hollow, terrifying blankness. He looked at Douglas, but his attorney was frantically scanning the document, his lips moving silently as he read the technical data. As the court can see, Adira continued, pacing slowly back to her table. The server log shows a massive data transfer. The original source code, the algorithmic models, and the 3D acoustic simulations were transferred from an internal user profile named AM Engineering. My profile to a secondary, external hard drive. Immediately after this transfer, my user profile was permanently deleted by an administrator account belonging to Ryan Mitchell. Objection, Your Honor. Douglas interrupted, recovering a fraction of his bluster. This is a digital document that could easily have been forged. It was never submitted during discovery. This is an ambush. It wasn't submitted during discovery because I didn't have it, Mr. Douglas. Adira fired back, her eyes flashing. I couldn't have it. Ryan Mitchell wiped my access to the servers 3 years ago. I only received this document at 2 o'clock this morning. Judge Walter peered over his glasses at the document. And how exactly did you obtain this, Miss Mitchell, if your access was revoked? Adira looked past the judge, past Ryan, to the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. She thought of the encrypted email that had chimed on her phone in the dead of night. She thought of the man who had vanished 6 months ago because his conscience had finally outweighed his greed. I received it from Liam Cross, Adira said. The name hit Ryan like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. In the gallery, Bianca audibly gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the quiet room. Liam Cross, Ryan's former chief financial officer. The man who had helped Ryan build the financial labyrinth that hid Adira's stolen millions. 6 months ago, Liam had abruptly resigned, citing health reasons, and had seemingly fallen off the face of the earth. Ryan had assured Bianca and the board that Liam was handled, bought off with a golden parachute so heavy he would never surface again. Liam Cross. Judge Walter frowned, recognizing the name from the initial corporate filings. The former CFO of Mitchell Industries. Yes, Your Honor, Adira said, her voice steady. Mr. Cross was the architect of my husband's financial restructuring. However, Mr. Cross kept extensive backups of the company's digital footprint as an insurance policy. Last night, he sent me a secure file containing not only the server logs proving I am the sole inventor of Project Echo, but also something else. Adira reached into her folder and pulled out the second sheet of paper. The air in the courtroom was now electrified, heavy with the impending scent of blood. Douglas was frozen, staring at his client with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Ryan had lied to his own lawyer. Your Honor, Mr. Douglas spoke eloquently about my husband's generosity, offering me a comfortable settlement, Adira said, walking the second document to the bailiff. He claimed there are no hidden assets. Yet, the document I am submitting now is a wire transfer receipt from 3 weeks ago. Judge Walter took the paper, his jaw tightening as he read the figures. As you can see, Adira's voice was relentless, a metronome of truth striking down the lies. 3 weeks ago, Ryan Mitchell transferred $42 million from the Mitchell Industries Operational Fund into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. A corporation, Your Honor, that lists its primary beneficiary as Bianca Sterling. Adira pointed a single, shaking finger toward the gallery, right at the woman in the ice-white suit. He is not offering me a settlement out of generosity, Your Honor, Adira concluded, the full weight of her years of suffering pouring into her final statement. He is bankrupting his own company to hide the assets before this court can divide them. The question I asked earlier was not theatrical. I am asking you, Your Honor, are we going to discuss the divorce, or are we going to discuss the offshore accounts? Judge Walter slowly lowered the document. He did not look at Douglas. He did not look at Adira. He turned his terrifying, glacial gaze directly onto Ryan Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, The judge's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain to me why I shouldn't have bailiffs place you in handcuffs for defrauding this court. 10 seconds in a courtroom, under the crushing weight of a judge's furious gaze, stretches into an eternity. For Adira, those 10 seconds were a symphony of vindication. She watched the color drain completely from Ryan Mitchell's face, leaving behind a sallow, sickly gray that starkly contrasted with his expensive Italian tan. The arrogant, untouchable tech mogul had vanished, replaced by a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Your Honor, Ryan stammered, his usually commanding baritone cracking into a reedy, panicked pitch. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany table, as if to push himself up, but his knees refused to lock. There is a profound misunderstanding here. That transfer was a legitimate corporate expenditure, an acquisition for overseas manufacturing logistics. It has nothing to do with marital assets. My wife is. She is confused by complex corporate structures. A legitimate corporate expenditure, Judge Walter repeated, his voice dangerously soft, dripping with absolute contempt. He held up the printed wire transfer receipt, his knuckles white, an acquisition that just happens to be routed into an offshore shell company registered specifically to your chief operating officer, who is sitting directly behind you. Do you take me for a fool, Mr. Mitchell? Do you think my 30 years on the bench were spent learning how to be easily deceived by men with good haircuts and bad intentions? No, Your Honor, I swear to you. Before Ryan could spin another lie, a new, explosive sound rocked the courtroom. It was the sound of a heavy leather briefcase being violently slammed onto a wooden table. Douglas, the high-priced, undefeated legal shark, had pushed himself away from Ryan as though his client had suddenly caught fire. Douglas's face was a map of raw, apoplectic rage. In the world of elite corporate litigation, there were unwritten rules. You could twist the truth, you could omit the truth, but you never, ever let your lawyer walk blindly into a federal perjury trap. Your Honor, Douglas bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He completely ignored Ryan, turning his back on his own client to face the judge. I would like the record to reflect that I had absolutely zero knowledge of this transfer, nor was I made aware of the existence of any offshore accounts or secondary R&D server logs. If these documents are authenticated, my client has not only defrauded this court, but he has severely compromised my firm's ethical standing. Douglas, what are you doing? Ryan hissed, grabbing the sleeve of his lawyer's custom suit. Douglas violently yanked his arm away, his eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it momentarily startled Adira. Do not touch me, Ryan. You lied to me. You sat in my office, looked me in the eye, and told me the financials were pristine. You told me your wife was a paranoid liability. Douglas turned back to the judge, his posture rigid. Your Honor, effective immediately, I am moving to withdraw as counsel for the petitioner. I will not suborn perjury, nor will I be a party to the willful hiding of marital assets. The courtroom dissolved into pandemonium. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, struggling to capture the rapid-fire destruction of Ryan Mitchell's empire. In the gallery, Bianca was frantically scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured fingernails clicking against the screen with desperate, panicked speed. She looked like she was trying to book a flight out of the country before the gavel even dropped. Judge Walter struck his gavel twice, the sharp cracks cutting through the noise like a whip. Order. Mr. Douglas, your motion to withdraw is noted and will be taken under advisement. However, you are not leaving this courtroom until I say so. Sit down. Walter's gaze snapped back to Ryan. Mr. Mitchell, you will not speak. You will not explain. Any further attempt to categorize a $42 million offshore diversion as logistics will result in you spending the weekend in the county holding cell. Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He sank back into his chair, looking terrifyingly small. Miss Mitchell, Judge Walter said, his tone softening only marginally as he addressed Adira. You have presented documents that, if authenticated, fundamentally alter the landscape of this dissolution. They also suggest severe criminal liability on the part of your husband. I am issuing an immediate, emergency freeze on all personal and corporate assets tied to Mitchell Industries, its subsidiaries, and any offshore entities bearing the names of Ryan Mitchell or Bianca Sterling. Adira exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for 4 years. The structure was coming down. The load-bearing pillars of Ryan's lies had been systematically kicked out, and gravity was finally doing its job. Furthermore, Judge Walter continued, picking up his pen. I am ordering an independent, immediate forensic audit of Mitchell Industries, to be conducted by a court-appointed receiver. And considering the severity of the allegations regarding the theft of intellectual property, I am strongly suggesting the District Attorney's Office be sent a transcript of today's proceedings. The judge looked at the clock on the heavy oak wall. This court will take a 2-hour recess. Mr. Mitchell, you are not to leave this building. Miss Mitchell, you have done exceptionally well, but I suggest you use this time to consider if you still wish to proceed pro se, because this has just escalated from a divorce into a full-scale corporate autopsy. We are adjourned. The gavel slammed down, finalizing the destruction. The quiet of the third-floor concourse was a stark contrast to the explosive energy of the courtroom. Adira sat on a hard wooden bench near the vending machines, a paper cup of lukewarm black coffee clutched between her trembling hands. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. Her heart hammered against her ribs in an erratic, painful rhythm, and the metallic taste of fear lingered on her tongue. She had done it. She had dropped the bomb. But the fallout was still settling, and she knew Ryan was not the type to surrender, even when buried under the rubble. She closed her eyes, letting her mind drift back to the encrypted email she had received at 2 in the morning. The subject line had been blank, but the sender's address, a string of random alphanumeric characters, had contained a subtle acoustic signature, a specific numerical frequency they used to joke about in the lab. Only Liam Cross would know it. Liam had been the only person at Mitchell Industries who had ever looked at Adira with something resembling guilt. As the CFO, he had built the financial walls that kept Adira out, but unlike Ryan, Liam had a conscience that occasionally bled through the corporate armor. 6 months ago, Adira had cornered him in the company parking garage, standing in front of his sleek Mercedes. "He's erasing me, Liam," she had told him, standing in the pouring rain. "And you're holding the eraser. How do you sleep?" Liam hadn't met her eyes. He had just stared at his keys, his jaw tight. "Ryan is a dangerous man to cross, Adira. If I blow the whistle, he'll ruin me. He'll take my pension, my reputation, everything. I can't be your savior." "I'm not asking for a savior," Adira had replied, the rain plastering her hair to her cheeks. "I'm asking for the truth. Because if you let him do this to me, eventually, he'll do it to you." It seemed her prophecy had come true. Ryan's greed was a bottomless pit, and apparently, Liam had finally realized that being an accomplice didn't grant him immunity from the slaughter. The files Liam had sent were a digital confession, a desperate plea for absolution from a man running from his own monster. "You think you're very clever, don't you?" The voice pulled Adira sharply back to the present. She opened her eyes to see Ryan standing at the end of the hallway. He had ditched his suit jacket, his tie was loosened, and the perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled. The mask was completely off. There was no charming smile, no practiced empathy, just the raw, sociopathic core of a man whose empire was burning. Adira didn't stand up. She didn't shrink back. She took a slow sip of her terrible coffee. "I don't think I'm clever, Ryan. I am clever. I designed an acoustic metamaterial that bends sound waves. You just designed a lie. Lies are much easier to break." Ryan took a step closer, checking over his shoulder to ensure the corridor was empty. His eyes were dark, devoid of whatever light used to fool her. "You think winning in there means anything? So you freeze the assets. So, you get a forensic accountant. Do you have any idea how long that will take?" "Years, Adira. I will tie you up in litigation until you are gray and destitute. I will bury you in paperwork until you beg me for a settlement." "You don't have the money to bury me anymore," Adira said calmly. "The accounts are frozen. The Cayman shell is exposed. Douglas just quit. Who's paying for this endless litigation, Ryan? Your charm?" He closed the distance between them, looming over her, trying to use his physical size to intimidate her the way he had done during the last terrifying months of their marriage. "I built the relationships. I hold the venture capital. The board will back me. They don't care about a stolen patent. They care about the stock price. You think you can run Mitchell Industries? You can't even look people in the eye without stuttering. You're a lab rat, Adira. You belong in the dark." Adira felt the old instinct to flinch, the conditioned response to his psychological abuse. But as she looked up at him, she didn't see the giant she had feared. She saw a frequency that was totally out of phase. He was loud, chaotic, and desperately unstable. She stood up. She was inches shorter than him, but she did not break eye contact. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice dropping into a register so cold and steady it seemed to lower the ambient temperature of the hall. "I used to be afraid of the spotlight. I used to let you speak for me because I thought my worth was confined to equations on a whiteboard. But you taught me something invaluable, Ryan." She stepped closer, invading his space, watching his pupils dilate with a flicker of genuine uncertainty. "You taught me how to dismantle a structure from the inside out," Adira whispered. "You think the board will back you? Wait until the SEC gets Liam Cross's server logs. The stock price is going to zero by Friday. You won't be fighting me for control of Mitchell Industries. You'll be fighting the federal government to stay out of a minimum security prison. I don't want to run your company, Ryan. I want to watch it burn to the ground, and then I'm going to build a new one on the ashes. Ryan stared at her, his jaw working silently. For the first time in their 7-year history, he had absolutely nothing to say. Recess is almost over, Adira said, stepping around him and tossing her coffee cup into a nearby trash bin. You better go find a public defender. I hear they're very busy. When courtroom 4B reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to positively toxic. Douglas was seated at the far edge of the petitioner's table, physically distancing himself from Ryan by a good 3 feet. He stared straight ahead, his arms crossed over his chest, refusing to make eye contact with his soon-to-be former client. Ryan sat hunched, staring at the wood grain of the table, his usual impeccable posture destroyed. Judge Walter took his seat, his face a granite mask. Before we proceed with the formal admission of the respondent's exhibits, the court requires clarification on a matter directly related to the newly discovered financial documents. The judge's eyes drifted to the gallery, locking onto the woman in the ice-white suit. Miss Sterling, I suggest you approach the bench. Now. Bianca flinched as if she had been physically struck. She looked around the gallery, as if hoping the judge was speaking to someone else. When she realized there was no escape, she slowly stood up. The arrogant, triumphant stride she had walked into the courtroom with was gone. She approached the wooden partition with the hesitant, terrified steps of a condemned woman. Miss Sterling, Judge Walters said, leaning over his high desk, you are not currently a party to this divorce, but as the chief operating officer of Mitchell Industries and the named beneficiary of the Sterling Logistics Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands, you are now dangerously close to being an accessory to federal fraud. The respondent is proceeding pro se. Miss Mitchell, do you have questions for this individual regarding the dispersal of marital assets? Adira stood up. She picked up her pen and a blank legal pad. I do, Your Honor. You are not under oath, Miss Sterling, Judge Walter warned, turning his glare back to Bianca. But if you lie to me in this courtroom regarding the hiding of assets, I will have you sworn in, and I will personally refer you for a perjury prosecution. Proceed, Miss Mitchell. Adira walked slowly toward the center of the room. She looked at Bianca. For 2 years, this woman had lived in Adira's house, slept in Adira's bed, and occupied the executive office Adira had earned. Bianca had always looked at Adira like she was an insignificant bug on the windshield of their corporate ascent. Now, the bug was driving the car. Miss Sterling, Adira began, her voice conversational, almost polite. 3 weeks ago, an operational transfer of $42 million was authorized from Mitchell Industries' primary holdings. Who authorized that transfer? Bianca swallowed, her eyes darting toward Ryan, who was glaring at her with a terrifying, silent intensity. It was an executive board decision. Authorized by the CEO. Authorized by Ryan Mitchell, Adira clarified. And what was the stated purpose of this transfer on the internal ledger? Overseas manufacturing expansion, Bianca recited, her voice trembling slightly. It was the lie they had rehearsed. The corporate jargon meant to deflect scrutiny. I see, Adira said, checking her notepad. $42 million for overseas manufacturing, Miss Sterling. As the chief operating officer, you oversee the supply chain, correct? Yes. Fascinating. Can you name a single factory, contractor, or logistics partner that Mitchell Industries employs in the Cayman Islands? The courtroom was dead silent. Douglas let out a slow, painful breath through his nose. He knew exactly what Adira was doing. She wasn't just asking questions. She was tightening a noose. We use holding companies to negotiate regional contracts, Bianca stammered, her platinum facade cracking under the pressure. It's standard corporate tax sheltering. Tax sheltering is one thing, Adira countered, stepping closer. But a shell company where you are the sole signatory and the sole beneficiary is quite another. Did you sign the banking documents to open Sterling Logistics in Geneva, Miss Sterling? Objection. Ryan suddenly shouted, jumping to his feet, unable to contain himself. She's badgering her. Bianca doesn't know anything about the high-level routing. Mr. Mitchell, sit down and shut your mouth. Judge Walter roared, slamming his gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Your counsel has requested to withdraw. You are currently unrepresented in a practical sense, and you are not recognized to speak. If you interrupt this proceeding again, you will be held in contempt. Miss Sterling, answer the question. Did you sign the documents? Bianca looked at Ryan, the man who had promised her half of an empire. The man who had assured her that his crazy wife would be handled quickly and quietly. She looked at the fury in his eyes, and then she looked at the cold, implacable justice radiating from Judge Walter. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. It overrides loyalty, love, and ambition. In that moment, Bianca calculated the odds and realized Ryan Mitchell was a sinking ship. She wasn't going to let him pull her under the water. Yes, Bianca whispered, her voice breaking. I signed them. And did Ryan Mitchell instruct you to open that account for the express purpose of hiding capital before the finalization of this divorce? Adira asked, her voice ringing clear and true. Ryan stared at Bianca. His eyes were wide, silently begging, silently threatening. Don't do it. Don't say it. Bianca gripped the wooden partition so tightly her knuckles bruised. Tears welled in her eyes, ruining her immaculate mascara. Yes, she sobbed, the word tearing out of her throat. He told me she would take everything if we didn't move it. He said he would marry me as soon as the decree was finalized. He told me to do it. It was his idea. All of it. The courtroom exhaled a collective, stunned breath. The final pillar had collapsed. The illusion of Ryan Mitchell was completely, irreparably shattered. No further questions, Your Honor, Adira said softly, returning to her seat. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt exhausted. But for the first time in years, the crushing weight on her chest was gone. Judge Walter leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if staving off a massive headache. He looked at Ryan, who was now staring blankly at the floor, completely broken. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Walter said, his voice heavy with finality. Your arrogance is exceeded only by your breathtaking criminality. Not only will I be granting the respondent's request for 100% equity in Mitchell Industries based on the fraud perpetrated during its founding, but I am holding you in contempt of court. The judge looked to the bailiff standing by the double doors. Bailiff, take Mr. Mitchell into custody. We are adjourning until the forensic audit is complete, at which point I fully expect the district attorney to file federal charges. As the heavy-set bailiff walked down the aisle, the jingle of handcuffs cutting through the silence, Ryan slowly stood up. He didn't look at Douglas. He didn't look at Bianca, who was openly weeping in the gallery. He looked at Adira. For a moment, there was no anger in his eyes, just a cold, terrifying emptiness. As the bailiff clamped the steel cuffs around his wrists, Ryan leaned slightly toward Adira's table. You think this is over, Adira? He whispered, his voice so quiet only she could hear it beneath the noise of the courtroom. I still have the original patent prototypes. The physical drives, the ones Liam didn't know about. If I go to prison, I'm taking the source code with me, and your company is nothing but a hollow shell. He smiled, a twisted, desperate ghost of his former smirk, as the bailiff pulled him away. Adira stood alone at the defense table, watching him go. He thought he had played his final card. He thought he had the upper hand. He had no idea what she had built in the basement over the last 6 months. The air in the subterranean level of Adira's rented townhouse was thick with the sharp, metallic scent of heated solder and the relentless, low-decibel thrum of high-capacity cooling fans. This basement, far removed from the sterile, glass and steel opulence of Mitchell Industries, had been her sanctuary, her war room, and her laboratory for the past 6 agonizing months. While Ryan had been out attending galas with Bianca, spending millions on custom-tailored suits, and smiling for the covers of tech magazines, Adira had been down here. She had lived on black coffee, protein bars, and a burning, cold-forged desire for absolute justice. She stood before a massive workbench scarred with burn marks and littered with tangled wires, staring at the physical manifestation of her survival. It was a cylindrical device, roughly the size of a jet engine's core, composed of interwoven rings of dark, matte metamaterials. Ryan's final threat in the courtroom still echoed in her mind. I still have the original patent prototypes, the physical drives. If I go to prison, I'm taking the source code with me, and your company is nothing but a hollow shell. He wasn't bluffing. Adira knew Ryan's paranoia better than anyone. He never trusted the cloud entirely. He would have kept the master source code for Project Echo on an encrypted, cold storage drive, likely locked in an off-site safety deposit box that Liam Cross had never been given the credentials to access. Ryan believed that as long as he held the physical code, he held the keys to the kingdom. He believed he could sell it to a rival defense contractor on the black market, fund a fleet of ruthless appellate lawyers, and drag Adira through decades of grueling, soul-crushing litigation. A soft knock at the heavy reinforced basement door pulled her from her thoughts. Adira pressed a button on her tablet, and the deadbolts disengaged with a heavy thud. Liam Cross stepped into the dim light. He looked a decade older than he had 6 months ago. The sleek, arrogant sheen of the corporate CFO had been scrubbed away, leaving behind a man haunted by his own complicity. He wore a rumpled trench coat, and his eyes darted nervously around the basement before settling on the massive cylindrical device. You're a hard woman to find, Adira, Liam said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I had to use 3 different encrypted relays just to get a ping on your location. Paranoia is a learned behavior, Liam, Adira replied, not looking away from the device. Ryan was an excellent teacher. What's the situation on the outside? Has the judge's order been fully executed? Liam sighed, leaning against the concrete wall. The receivers moved in an hour ago. The FBI raided the corporate headquarters. They confiscated every server, every hard drive, and every filing cabinet in Bianca's office. The SEC has officially halted trading on Mitchell Industries stock. It dropped 60% before the freeze. And Ryan? He made bail, Liam said, the words heavy with dread. His personal accounts are frozen, but he leveraged a silent partner to post a $10 million bond. He's out, Adira. And he's desperate. A cornered Ryan Mitchell is the most dangerous entity on the planet. Adira finally turned to look at Liam. She felt a flicker of sympathy for the man, but it was overshadowed by the memory of the years he had spent helping Ryan hide her money. He's going to try and sell the cold storage drives, she stated flatly. He needs liquid capital to flee the country or fight the federal charges. He already is, Liam confirmed, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. I still have a few bugs planted in the executive transport logs. An hour after he made bail, he arranged a clandestine meeting for tonight at the old shipyard warehouses. He's meeting with representatives from Apex Dynamics. Adira felt a chill run down her spine. Apex Dynamics was Mitchell Industries' biggest, most ruthless competitor in the aerospace sector. They had spent billions trying to reverse engineer Project Echo, to no avail. If Ryan handed them the master source code, Mitchell Industries would be obsolete overnight. Ryan would get his millions, disappear into a non-extradition country, and Adira would inherit a bankrupt, worthless company. He thinks he's checkmated me, Adira said softly, walking over to the cylindrical device and gently running her hand along the cool, dark metal. Hasn't he? Liam asked, his voice trembling. Adira, if Apex gets that code, it's over. The company is dead. Your life's work is gone. Adira turned on the diagnostic monitor attached to the workbench. A cascade of green code flooded the black screen. My life's work wasn't Project Echo, Liam. Project Echo was just my first draft. It was the rough sketch I made when I was 24 years old, terrified of the world and desperate for my husband's approval. Liam frowned, stepping closer. What are you talking about? Echo is the most advanced acoustic dampening technology in the world. Adira corrected. She tapped the screen, bringing up a 3D rendering of the device sitting before them. For the last 6 months, while Ryan thought I was crying myself to sleep, I've been working. Project Echo absorbs 99% of low-frequency sound waves. But it has a flaw. It relies on passive structural resistance. I realized the flaw 3 years ago, but Ryan locked me out before I could fix it. Adira looked at Liam, her eyes burning with a fierce, brilliant light that made her look like an entirely different person. The stuttering, timid woman was dead. This is Project Siren, Adira said. It doesn't just absorb sound waves, Liam. It actively inverts and cancels them at the quantum level. It is small enough to fit inside a commercial drone and powerful enough to silence a commercial jet engine. More importantly, it creates an active acoustic vacuum that renders Project Echo completely inert. If a competitor uses Echo, Siren can remotely shatter their dampening fields by finding their resonant frequency. Liam stared at the machine, his mouth slightly open. The financial implications were staggering. You built an override. You built a weapon that destroys your own stolen patent? I built an evolution, Adira corrected, shutting down the monitor. Ryan thinks he holds all the cards because he stole my past. He doesn't realize I've already built the future. Let him meet with Apex Dynamics. Let him try to sell my ghost. Adira reached under the workbench and pulled out a heavy, protective transit case. We're going to the shipyard, Liam. It's time to show my ex-husband what happens when you leave a scientist alone in the dark. Warehouse 42 smelled of salt water and decaying timber. Beneath the harsh glare of portable halogens, Ryan Mitchell clutched a titanium briefcase, facing Marcus Vance, the CEO of Apex Dynamics. $50 million in untraceable crypto, Ryan demanded, desperate to liquidate the stolen Project Echo code. You plug this in, and you bypass 10 years of R&D. Vance hesitated, his security detail flanking him. You're a radioactive asset, Mitchell. The SEC is crawling over your servers. Before Ryan could argue, the rhythmic clicking of high heels pierced the damp warehouse air. Adira stepped out of the shadows, with Liam Cross struggling behind her carrying a heavy transit case. The deal is off, Mr. Vance, Adira announced. her voice echoing off the corrugated steel. The code in that case is entirely obsolete. Ryan panicked, shielding the briefcase. Don't listen to her. The code is flawless. It's a relic, Adira countered calmly. My husband stole Echo from me, but he couldn't innovate it. I'm here to show you why you should keep your money. Adira pressed a remote control in her pocket. The heavy latches on Liam's transit case popped open, and Project Siren hummed to life. Instantly, an unnatural, absolute silence sucked the ambient noise from the room. Adira turned a dial. A localized, inverted frequency hit Ryan's titanium briefcase. The metal began to vibrate violently until, with a sharp crack, the reinforced hinges completely shattered. Vance stared in absolute horror. If he installed Ryan's tech in a commercial airliner, Adira could literally vibrate the plane apart from the ground. Project Echo wasn't just useless. It was a catastrophic liability. Your tech is garbage, Vance sneered, turning his back on Ryan. Wait. No. Ryan lunged, dropping the solid-state drive onto the concrete floor. Adira stepped forward, bringing her heel down hard and crushing the drive into useless shards of silicon. Ryan fell to his knees, weeping over the broken pieces of his empire. I didn't ruin you, Ryan, Adira said softly. I just stopped letting you take the credit. Chapter 9. The final resonance. The arrest took exactly 12 minutes. Liam had anonymously tipped off the feds before they even arrived. Attempting to sell frozen corporate assets violated every clause of Ryan's bail. Adira stood by her car, watching the flashing lights illuminate Ryan's hollowed-out face as agents shoved him into an armored SUV. It's over, Liam said, watching the vehicles depart. Bianca flipped for immunity, and the board just held an emergency vote. They ousted Ryan. They want you as the sole CEO. Mitchell Industries is yours. Adira looked out at the dark harbor. The psychological cage Ryan had built around her was finally gone. Mitchell Industries is dead. We're renaming it Siren Acoustics. We will recall every piece of Echo tech and replace it. She turned to face Liam. And as for you, you're fired, Liam. Liam closed his eyes, accepting the blow. I understand. But, Adira continued, her tone sharp. Siren Acoustics needs a chief compliance officer who knows exactly where all the financial bodies are buried. You start Monday, half your old salary, and I review your ledgers every Friday. Liam gasped, a profound wave of relief washing over him. Thank you, Adira. I won't fail you. The next morning, sunlight poured into the towering glass skyscraper that had once been her prison. Adira walked into the dead-quiet executive suite and approached the heavy mahogany desk. She pulled her platinum wedding bands from her pocket and set them precisely in the center of the wood, leaving the ghosts of her past behind. Stepping back into the hallway, the elevator doors chimed. A team of her core engineers stood waiting, holding blueprints and tablets. Good morning, Miss Mitchell, the lead engineer smiled. Adira smiled back, a genuine, radiant expression of a woman who had finally stepped into her power. Good morning, Adira replied. Let's get to work. The greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's rebuilding yourself into something untouchable. Adira's transformation from a dismissed shadow into a visionary leader proves that true brilliance can never be permanently stolen, only delayed. When others attempt to silence your voice or claim your achievements, let your work speak with a frequency they cannot ignore. While deceit might win the sprint, authenticity always commands the marathon. If this story of claiming back stolen power and rising from the ashes inspired you, please leave a like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more empowering tales.